We are live.
Okay, let's start. 11 o'clock. Shall we let everyone in? Yeah.
Yeah.
All good to go, I think.
Yeah. Okay, let's start. 11 o'clock. Shall we let everyone in?
I think Nimesh bhai, you're on mute.
Sulabh starts first.
Yeah, I'm just giving a minute for everyone to be admitted through.
Jai Jinendra.
Jai Jayant, again bhai. We'll just give a minute for to admit all the participants, and we'll kick off. Right, I think we can start. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear
Okay.
you.
Okay. Good morning, Jai Jinendra and Namaste. Welcome to JITO UK's event on Buy to Let. And before we start, just want to make a small disclaimer that this just so that everyone knows that the session is being recorded and it is also live on our YouTube channel. By participating here, you are consenting to this recording. Yeah. Now, before commencing, we would like to invite our board member, Nimish K. Mehta, to kick off the session with a Kar Mantra and a brief message. So please welcome Nimish K. Mehta.
Jai Jinendra, everyone. Before I make an announcement, I'd like to start with a Naukar Mantra. My wife will recite the Naukar Mantra.
Namo Arahantanam, Namo Namo, Namo Sitanam, Namo Namo, Namo Ayariyanam, Namo Namo, Namo Uvajayanam, Namo Namo, Namo Loye Sarvasahu, Namo, Namo Loye Sarvasahu, Namo. Iso Panjanamukaro Sarva Pavapanasano Mangalanam Cha Sarvesim Padamam Havai Mangalam Padamam Havai Mangalam.
Thank you, Priti. Jai Jinendra again. My name is Nimish Mehta, and I am a board member for JITO UK, and I'm honored and privileged to welcome you all here today. JITO stands for Jain International Trade Organization. It's a global organization set to achieve socio-economic empowerment, value-based education, community welfare, practice of compassion, spread of global friendship, and spiritual upliftment of fellow beings. Globally, it has more than 12 chapters, and most recently, we've had Belgium as a new chapter. JITO UK was established in 2016, and soon will be completing 5 years of this journey. A journey that has been exciting, nothing short of all the thrills and hard work that is involved in running any startup. Without naming anyone, I want to take this opportunity to thank all of those involved so far, be it the trustees, the board members, and most importantly, the volunteers and the audience. UK is blessed with many Jain religious organizations, but JITO UK has managed to work with and garner support from all these organizations to provide a single front when it comes to economic betterment, or rather economic empowerment of our community. It provides a platform for employers, employees, professionals from all fields to network, educate, and encourage Jane-to-Jane trade. Our current board, which was formed a few months ago under the leadership of Nemish Bhai H. Mehta, as the chair, is determined and highly motivated to work towards the vision and fulfilling the objectives of JITO UK. As our chairman had pointed out in our first session of the year, that 2021 looks busy with lots of events planned. I hope we will continue to have your support just the way it has been so far. Today, we start with this session on Buy to Let. I now hand over this platform back to our secretary and convener of this event, Sulabh Jain. Over to you. Thank you, Jatin.
Thank you, Nimish Bhai. Let's start with just a disclaimer that the information provided on this program is general guidance and drawn from our presenter's personal experience and not intended as a specific financial or advice on investment. And it does not necessarily represent the views of JITO UK, organizers, sponsors, or any participating entity. Everyone, all individuals are recommended to seek professional advice as appropriate before making any financial decisions. UK has about more than 2.5 million landlords, with the average size of holding being 3 properties. Significant size of this number consists of accidental landlords who had no intention of getting into buy-to-let market, but found themselves as landlord due to circumstances. They never had the chance to think about all aspects of all aspects involving a buy-to-let business or a property. But even the professional landlords have missed a few or found it difficult to keep pace with the changing dynamics of this industry. We are fortunate enough to have Amol Karve and Brahma Vanga of Mortgage Kart among us today as passionate entrepreneurs, investors, and experts to share their thoughts and suggestions on buy-to-let as an investment option. So I would like to introduce Amol and Brahma. Amol is founder and CEO of Mortgage Kart. He has over 18 years of experience within banking. Previously, he held position of managing director and global head of credit at HSBC. Brahma is co-founder and COO of Mortgage Kart. He has over 15 years of experience within banking. Previously, he held position of director and senior mortgage executive at HSBC. So we have got quite a power-packed duo here. And without further ado, please welcome Amol and Brahma. Over to you guys, please.
Thank you, Sulabh, and thank you to all the members of JITO for giving us an opportunity to share our views on buy-to-lets. It's great to see that there's a lovely audience turnout. I hope you are all having a good time, and I hope that you will get some value out of this time that you spared on the long weekend for us. What the reason that we decided to get into entrepreneurship was that we really had 2 main goals. One, to create and build, and leverage the knowledge that we have built in banking to create an organization that would help, people. And we've taken an education first approach to our, mortgage advice journey. The other thing that we wanted to do was to actually build digital solutions. So to that extent, we have actually, as we've embarked on this path of entrepreneurship, we've tried to focus on coming up with the right tools, coming up with the right automation to make the process of mortgaging significantly simpler. And that's what we're hoping to achieve with Mortgage Kart. So I set up Mortgage Kart about 3 years ago. Brahma, who's been a friend and colleague for a number of years, was and has been my co-founder ever since the first day. And when I asked him to join me, he readily agreed and ditched, his high-profile banking job to come up on this entrepreneurial journey with me. So for today, if I can just share my screen, I would like to take you through a presentation that we've put together which shows you, gives you a broad overview of buy-to-let investing. So very quickly, if I can just set up the agenda, I will perhaps open up and take you through a quick introduction and lay out what are the main goals that buy-to-let investors normally have, and how to set those goals and then figure out the right buy-to-let strategies based on those goals. Um, I will then hand it over to Brahma to talk through buy-to-let properties and give some more information about what are the different kinds of buy-to-let properties, what is the right property, what are the costs to consider, and then cover off landlord obligations that one has to keep in mind when one goes about owning and building a buy-to-let portfolio. I will then again take it back and walk you through some points around what is the right kind of buy-to-let mortgage, talk about the two main lender types, and then also cover what are the taxation related elements that you must keep in mind. Finally, I'll hand it back to Brahma, who can then cover off risks and then close the session by also discussing some next steps. So that's how we'll follow it. We'll try to keep it to 40 minutes or so. Feel free to ask questions on the chat window that is available. And I think towards the end, our colleagues will perhaps take us through those questions. So without further ado, let's get started. So let me just put my screen on full screen mode. Hopefully you can see this. Okay, so I think the first thing to say here is that in order to be a successful buy-to-let investor, I think it's very important to figure out what are your goals from buy-to-let investing. So the starting point of any buy-to-let investing journey should be figuring out what your goals are. Once you figure out what those goals are, the right buy-to-let strategy can be created and can be followed up. It is very important to have goals, whether you have a small portfolio or a big portfolio, whether you are an accidental landlord who then now needs to make sure and follow through on their buy-to-let investment, whether you are in a lower tax bracket or a higher tax bracket, whether you are a younger investor or an older investor, whether you have some near-term objectives or long-term objectives, it's important to set these goals first. And we'll cover those in a minute. The second thing that I wanted to lay out was that investing in buy-to-lets should happen with a mortgage. And we'll take an example and go through why that is the case. The third point to make is that buy-to-let, typically, property more generally, is a relatively safe investment, but you must have a longer term horizon. We have seen, with the past, financial crisis in 2007, 2008, and later, that there have been ups and downs in UK property. But there are some safe harbor factors that actually work for property in the UK, which is unlike a lot of the other countries. Firstly, I think UK has always seen a higher demand for property compared to the supply of property. Secondly, when you think of it over a longer term horizon, typically, at least the data shows that over a 10-year period, no UK property index has been in the negative, other than small pockets in the northeast. So generally speaking, it is considered a relatively safe investment. But the most important point here is that a longer term horizon is important. I think I needn't add that past performance is no guarantee of a future, but I think that we've got to work with whatever data points or whatever wisdom we've collected over time. The final point to make here is that buy-to-let investments can be thought of as two types. One is rent yielding with a limited scope for capital appreciation, and the other where the rent yield is not that great, but there is better scope for capital appreciation. You can almost equate this as, when you do mutual fund investing, you see income funds and you see growth funds, or you see even single name, you see dividend paying stocks and growth oriented stocks. So you can equate it like that, where some properties will not appreciate a lot, but will give you very good steady returns, and then the others will not give you great returns, but have a better scope for appreciation. We'll cover that off also in the next couple of minutes. So if I take you to the first point then, which is that think about your strategy first. So before you get your strategy, you have to make sure that your objectives are very clear in your heads. So I've given a few examples here. On the left side, if you go through the columns, you might be somebody who just wants a passive income stream to supplement or replace their primary income as you get older or as you go towards your retirement. You might be somebody who has good amount of income and who wants to invest because they want to create a balanced investment portfolio, and where the primary goal is capital appreciation, and you're not that fussed about rental income. You might be an accidental landlord where you had a property, you've upgraded over time, and you didn't want to sell your first property, so you've just held on to that. Or you might be a seasoned property investor and you simply want to grow your portfolio. Now, these are some examples. Can we take an audience poll very quickly? And perhaps Shubham Bhai, may I request you to, just take an audience poll of, who or how many people think in one or a different way. So could you please answer this audience poll that is popped up on your screens? What kind of an investor do you think you are? So we'll give another 10 seconds for people to vote. Okay, so we'll now close the poll perhaps. Okay, so broadly speaking, what we're seeing is about nearly half of you are wanting some passive income to replace your active income. About a third of you are looking for capital appreciation, and then smaller proportion, I should say, have just been accidental landlords, and then there are some people who've had several properties. Now, why is this important? I think this is important because how you set your strategy is directly a function of what your objectives are. So as an example, you might have, might be someone who's needing a passive income, in which case you should look for properties that are higher yielding properties. Examples could be properties that are up north that typically cost less, but that can give you a good robust rental yield. You could have properties outside the M25 belt, where again within M25 and within London properties are much higher priced. You could look at areas with high tenancy demand, which are easier to rent. So where, for example, you see a lot of activity, a lot of floating population, people who rent temporarily when they come to the country, and once they settle, then they end up buying. So those could be areas that you could look for. You need to think about what your or your partner's tax bracket is, because based on that, you would structure it in a certain way, and that Brahma and I will cover in the later sections. I think most important here is that the rental income becomes the basis of actually driving all your borrowing decisions, because ultimately you are going to replace your primary income, and at that point, the only income that you will have, or at least will have majority wise, will be your rental income, and your income over time, your primary income over time, will reduce. And then finally, in most cases, buy-to-lets are held in personal names. Now, I don't want to go through every single of these goals, but I think the point that I wanted to make here was the strategy should be an outcome of the goals, not the other way around. So if you have the goals clear, then often it's easier to create the strategy. So moving on to the next slide, perhaps, it's also helpful to dwell on the mathematics of leverage. So here I've created an example to illustrate that. So imagine the column on the left is where you actually are not borrowing any money at all. You buy a property that is worth 200,000. It is completely self-financed. It earns a rent of about 800 pounds a month, and therefore the annual rent is just under 10,000. And your return on your equity, all of the money that you've invested, becomes 9,600 on a 200,000 base. Therefore, it is 4.8%. Now imagine where you actually are borrowing to buy the same property. You put in 25% and then borrow 75% of the money. So in that case, you borrow 150,000 pounds in form of a mortgage. The rent is still the same. It's 800 as in the previous example. So it's 9,600 per year. The interest cost, let's say that you borrowed funds at 2%, is 3,000 pounds. So your earnings this time are lower at 6.6 thousand, not 9.6 thousand. However, your return on equity will be substantially more because your own funds are only 50,000 pounds out of the total pie. The rest are bank funds. So your return on equity is 6.6 over 50,000, which is 13.2%. Now put it differently, you can buy 4 such properties and actually earn more than 25,000 pounds with the same amount of capital versus what you would have bought if you had not taken leverage. I guess the point here is that if you borrow well and if you borrow in the right circumstances, it can actually multiply your returns substantially. I think we've seen that in the stock market. We've seen that with other investments that we do. But property is the single place where you get a secured borrowing, where you can predictably deliver cash flows, where you can take a long-term stance, and you can get a good multiplier on your returns. Now, I touched upon in the previous slide here that buy-to-let investments are primarily of 2 types. Let's look at the first type. So this is an example of a property that is being sold at present. It's on Rightmove. It is a property that has listed for 150,000 pounds. It is renting at 850 pounds per month. Gives a 6.8% yield on unlevered basis on when you don't borrow any money at all. But if you can see on the left-hand side, the property history, it has not appreciated massively. It is actually quite an insipid rate of appreciation. Prices have stayed roughly the same. It has gone up a little bit, perhaps over a 10+ year period, but it's there or thereabout. If I take you through the next slide, so this is another example of another property that is on the market at the moment, is being sold for 600,000 pounds. It's in Sutton. This will rent out at 1,500 pounds a month, which means a rental yield of 3%. Having said that, if you look at the capital appreciation that it has seen over the same period, it has gone from 250,000 to 600,000 pounds. The point I wanted to make was that you can get low yield and good appreciation, or you can get great yield and not so good appreciation. It's very difficult to find something that will give you great yield and great appreciation, because guess what? We are not the only smart people on earth. A lot of people will have chased that and already taken that in their portfolios. So it's always a good idea to think about which kind of investor you are. Let me now hand it over to my colleague Brahma, who will take us through the next section, which is about a buy-to-let property. Over to you, Brahma.
Wonderful, Mo. Thank you very much. Can we move to the next slide, please? Okay, so now the type of property that you buy is the central theme for all BTLs, right? So we'll quickly look at what type of properties to look at, because the type of property that you get will drive a lot of things. It'll drive the quality of the tenants that you get. It will drive the choice of who we go with from a mortgage lending perspective. It will drive what costs we have in the process, and thereby the P&L. So the most important thing, obviously, is a location. If yield is something that you're looking for, look for properties in towns where there is a lot of floating population, where there's a lot of companies where folks come in and rent for short periods of time. Look for commuter towns. University towns are a great place to rent. But then if you're looking for more of a capital appreciation, then you need to look for commuter towns where you have detached and semi-detached properties. So your location is probably the single largest factor that determines not only what you get in terms of capital appreciation, in terms of P&L, but also what type of tenants you get. The size of the property is also quite important because most lenders have restrictions on a minimum property size. Typically, you need at least 30 square meters for the lenders to consider the particular property to be lendable on. And then also single bed, a 2-bed properties all drive the type of tenants that you get. Single beds probably you will get, a very young couple or probably bachelors, whereas 2-bed properties would probably open you up more to the small family market also. So the size of the property is also key to what type of tenants you want to bring in. Most people also consider new builds, particularly when you're buying new builds off plan. With new builds, what you need to keep in mind is that the property does not have an established price history. Therefore, most lenders would cap the loan to value ratio that they would lend on the property. So from a lending perspective, you probably might not get 80, 85, you probably might get only 70, 75% in terms of lending. And then with new builds, particularly if you're buying off plan, keep in mind that you're signing up for a property value well in advance, and you need to understand the risk of what the property values are likely to be when you actually buy the property and when the property fructifies. Leasehold and freehold, again, is a very important consideration. Most of the flats in the UK are freehold. The length of time that remains in the freehold is an important thing because that determines the property price also. Because those properties which come with smaller freehold, remaining periods, mortgage lenders are not happy to lend, and they also don't command good prices, and you will have to pay a premium to get the lease extended. So watch out for that. Ex-council properties, again, great properties to actually buy, but might not be properties that all lenders would lend on. And typically HMO, holiday lets, all these need licensing agreements would involve higher costs. So if you're buying these properties, you really need to understand what you're getting into. Could we move on to the next slide, Amol? Wonderful. Now let's look at the same problem from a cost perspective. And here I probably will bunch this into 3 distinct groups. The first one, obviously, is the capital that you invest, which is deposit. For buy-to-lets, it is typically 25%. You at least need to put in 25% to begin with. You probably might get away with 20% deposit with a couple of lenders, but that comes with a substantially higher price. And unless you've baked that into your calculations, a good starting point is to assume that you will put 25% deposit in. And the second set of costs are more the upfront costs or the one-time costs. These are things like stamp duty, conveyancing, and other costs like refurbishment costs or survey costs. Stamp duty, you will have to pay the basic stamp duty and the 3% surcharge. And the surcharge is there because this is the property that you are doing a business on. This is a buy-to-let, and therefore the 3% surcharge will apply. And for properties beneath 500,000, you are all well aware of the fact that there is a stamp duty holiday through the end of June, but the 3% surcharge will still apply. Conveyancing costs are the costs that the lawyers would charge, and other costs typically involve the cost for survey and any refurbishment that you make before you let the property out. A large driver of your P&L are your ongoing costs, and this is where you need to understand every single cost head and make sure that you're budgeting for it. Typical ongoing costs are actually maintenance costs. Even with the best of interest and even with the best of off tenants, you will have regular maintenance costs that come up. Leaks that need to be fixed and something else that needs to be fixed, paint that's been chipped off. So that definitely needs to be budgeted for. Another big thing that most folks tend to forget is rental voids. You're obviously not going to rent the property every single day of the year, every single year go forward. There will be actually downtime between tenancies, downtime when you're repainting the property, refurbishing the property, during which time you not only have to pay the mortgage, but then you also have to pay all the council taxes and all the utilities. So definitely budget for that. And then you obviously need to have a rainy day fund. Things like a boiler breakdown, things like white goods not working will happen at some point or the other. So those are other ongoing costs that you definitely need to factor in. And then there are certain insurances that are either good to take or you're obligated to take. For example, buildings insurance is something that the lender would require us to take. Otherwise, we'll be in violation of the mortgage terms and conditions. So buildings insurance, which protects the building against fire damage, is something that we need to take. And landlord insurance is something that is definitely good to have, because that will protect you against troublesome tenants and any unforeseen costs with having to evict tenants and so on and so forth. So understanding the costs, which again is linked to the type of property you buy, is quite important, and you need to plan for all of this, and because your yields will depend on what this costs would look like. Okay, now let's look at your obligations, right? I mean, keep in mind that that a property that you're renting out is going to be somebody else's home. So when you rent it out, even those guys have certain rights. In fact, to the point that you might not even be able to enter the property once you rent in without your a tenant giving you their consent to enter the property. So your tenants have rights, you have rights, and then the changing a landscape from a legal landscape here is ever changing. Particularly in the recent 5-10 years, there have been substantial changes that have been made to how rental income is treated from an income tax perspective, how leaseholds are being modified and how leaseholds are being streamlined, to the various rights tenants have versus you have. So understanding the legal landscape is quite important. And this is where there's a bit of an angle also into whether you want to manage the property yourself or whether you want to give it to an agency to manage. Because if you normally give it to an agency to manage, they charge you for it, typically in the range of 8% to 12% based on location. But those guys will be on top of the legal landscape because this is what they do every day. But that means more cost to you. But if you're trying to manage the property on your own, be very well cognizant about the legal landscape and what the rights are. Mortgage terms and conditions, very, very important. Lenders shouldn't hold us in breach of contract. If you're renting the property, the lender needs to know that we are renting the property, be it in the form of a buy-to-let or be it in the form of a consent to let, but lenders need to know that we are lending, that we are renting the property. And certain lenders don't like certain kinds of tenants or certain kinds of tenancies. And let me explain this a bit further. So some lenders like NatWest, for example, are not happy with us lending or not happy with us actually renting the properties, those clients that are on social service benefits, DSS benefits. So if they find out that that's who our tenants are, then they might call the mortgage. So we need to understand what tenants are acceptable versus not. So some lenders are not happy with us renting the property on an Airbnb basis, or basically giving or basically getting into a rental guarantee scheme where we basically rent the property out to another firm who guarantees a certain amount of rent for us every month, but we completely lose control on who they're renting, how they're renting, why they're renting. Again, something that lenders are not happy with. They expect us to rent the property on a short hold tenancy basis to families or single individuals on a 6-month, 12-month leases, but nothing beyond that. So understanding this is also quite important to make sure that we're always on the right side of the law. Yeah. Know your tenant. Very, very important. Sometimes credit checks and then actually references are commonly done. But I think what one should also do is also check to make sure that that your tenants have the rights to live in the UK, and from an immigration standpoint, everything's clean. And then I would also look into where the sources of income are from, and particularly whether it's single income dependent on one person or whether it's diversified income where both wife and husband are working. And I think all of these will provide a sense of assurance to us that they might not be defaults on this property go forward. So not only knowing your tenant, but their sources of income, I think also in a very subtle way is quite important. Carry the right kind of insurances. We've touched upon this, both the buildings insurance and the landlord's insurance. I won't probably dwell on this a bit more. And then how to operate a tenancy deposit scheme, when to collect the funds, where to deposit it, when do you give it back to your tenant, what do you withhold, what don't you withhold. Again, knowing the scheme very well is important, because it not only protects you but also protects your tenant. Property maintenance, we've touched upon this. on previous slides, but all the property maintenance when it comes to the exterior of the property, making sure that it's in livable condition, making sure that the white goods are working, making sure that we attend to any complaints made by the tenant are quite important. It's not only our obligation, but then it also has a long, strong tie into the P&L. So understanding this gamut of landlord obligations is quite important as we rent properties out. So it looks like you're on, mute, Molini.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Brahma. So if I can then take you guys to the next section, which is about the mortgage itself. So I think there are a few, just as Brahma talked about, what are the considerations on property that you must have. There are also a number of things that you must think about from a mortgage standpoint. First point is, who is the right lender for that circumstance? There's substantial variability in how lenders look at buy-to-let properties. So certain lenders will tend to have one kind of risk appetite, certain lenders will tend to have another kind of risk appetite. So what kind of property you are buying, how much your own affordability is, what are your personal circumstances, what is the rental yield that the property is giving, what kind of the structure is that you're holding the property in. All of these will determine lender risk appetite, and they will either lend or they will not lend, dependent upon all of these different things. So an example could be that everything might be perfectly fine, but you may have a freehold flat as an example. Certain lenders will say no to that, or they may say no to a certain property simply because there's a high concentration risk, meaning that they've lent a lot of to a lot of customers in that particular development, and they do not want to take on any more properties in that particular development. So we often see these kind of things as well. So there are different drivers that determine whether a certain lender will lend to you or not. And I think it's important to again do your research, or come to us and we'll help you do the research on why a certain lender will or will not be okay to lend in that circumstances. When you think about true cost, that is the next element that I wanted to point your attention. So when we think about investing into a buy-to-let, we should not be focusing on just the interest rate alone. We should be looking at the out-of-pocket interest plus fee costs, because both of these are important. Several times you will come to know what the upfront costs are, but you will not necessarily come to know what the redemption costs are. So fees typically are of two types. There are upfront fees, and there are also some redemption fees. And many times people neglect to talk about those redemption fees, but those are also important in actually determining overall profitability. A third element could be ERCs, or early repayment charges. So number of buy-to-lets can be can have punitive early repayment charges, and if you're somebody that is looking for some flexibility, then it is another factor that you should take into consideration before determining what the right lender for your requirements is. Affordability, we'll touch upon this in a minute, but broadly speaking, there are two or three different kinds of approaches that banks take to determining your affordability. Some banks tend to look at only the rental yield of properties. Others tend to look at the rental yield plus they will give you some credit for your own income and your own level of indebtedness. And then a third category of lender will look only for your affordability. They are not bothered about the rental yield at all. And we'll touch upon that in a minute, where I will expand on it. The fourth aspect is fixed versus variable rates. Buy-to-lets typically have fixed rates only. It's unusual to find variable rate products. Not that they don't exist, but it's unusual to find them, and there are far fewer. I think one other thing to bring out here is that it must be important consideration for what is the near-term broad economic interest rate going to do in the economy before you determine whether you want to go down a fixed rate versus a variable rate. Also, you'll see that in residential properties or residential mortgages, a lot of the variable rates have no early repayment charges. That is not necessarily true in buy-to-lets. So be very discerning, be very careful of understanding which variable rate products have versus don't have early repayment charges. Usually, a lot of the variable rate products for buy-to-let mortgages also have early repayment charges. The next point is on interest only versus capital repayment. So when it comes to buy-to-lets, typically, as I mentioned previously, buy-to-let is a game of leverage. Therefore, you want to maximize the leverage, and typically, interest-only products are the norm, not the exception. Unlike residential, where interest-only products are the exception and capital repayment is the norm. Sometimes though, capital repayment may make sense. So as an example, if you're nearing retirement and you want to reduce your debt, or you want to be debt free by the time you retire, it might be a good idea to actually start repaying some capital. Also bear in mind that a number of buy-to-let products will not have the 10% overpayment allowance that you will see in a lot of the residential mortgages. So again, be careful about what mortgage you choose, because if you are somebody who wants to make those overpayments and reduce your leverage in preparation of retirement, then that is something that you should keep in mind. The final point is on the length of the initial term. So again, length of initial term is invariably tied to the amount of leverage or the affordability that you can get. Typically, the products that have got a shorter length of initial term, such as 2 years, have a higher requirement for rental yield, or what we call in the industry as interest coverage ratio. So the total rental yield must cover more versus your interest yield versus looking at a 5-year property. And therefore, the length of initial term is quite tied to the amount of rental yield that you get. If put it simply, if your rental yield is not great, you will not be able to borrow over a 2-year period. You'll have to borrow over a 5-year period, which means that there is a higher interest rate invariably. I think that if you're again somebody who needs to release equity quickly, or if you want to make changes to your buy-to-let or your plans in general in 2 years' time, then again that's something that will be a factor in determining what kind of initial term that you choose. And then the final element is the remortgage cost. Very often, because fees in buy-to-lets typically are higher than fees in residential products, it's a good idea to think about the overall monthly cost of ownership or monthly cost of mortgaging before you decide whether you want to go down a 2-year route or a 5-year route. So these are all the points that you should think about when figuring out what is the right mortgage that you will take for your needs. Now, moving on to the next one, there are broadly 2 ways to borrow money. The first way is what we call on the basis of rental yield. Now, here, what we're saying is that most of your underwriting decision that lenders will make will be on the basis of rental yield. It will be less relevant to them what your income is. It will be much more relevant what your rental yield is. So I talked a little bit about interest coverage ratio, meaning that if you are a high rate taxpayer, typically lenders will ask for about 145% of interest coverage ratio. What this means is that you have to have higher level of rent to cover for your interest cost, simply because you are a high rate taxpayer. Whereas if you are a lower rate taxpayer, the interest coverage ratio is typically lower. So it, oddly, very perversely benefits people who have lower incomes than people who have got higher incomes. The stress factor is another another factor to keep in mind, which is that a 2-year mortgage typically has a higher stress because there is a greater possibility that you will face an interest rate shock in the near term. Whereas if you borrow over a 5-year period, because the rate is fixed for 5 years, there's a lower propensity to get an interest rate shock, and therefore the stress factor is lower. So your ability to borrow is a factor of rental yield, your interest coverage ratio, and stress factor, all 3 things. Also, as I said, some lenders need very modest minimum incomes, and other lenders don't need any minimum income at all when they use this method of underwriting, or this method of determining your credit affordability. The final point to make here is that there is a top slicing method available, meaning that where your rental yield is not enough, some lenders will look at your earned incomes, meaning your salaries or your profits from your self-employed businesses, in addition to the rental yield, in determining whether they can or cannot lend to you what you are looking for. So that is one element. This is the rental yield element. Now there's a second element, which is a few lenders also look purely at your affordability, and they're not bothered about whatever the rental yield is. So you might be earning 1% or 1.5% rental yield, but if you've got great incomes, they'll lend to you anyways. If you've got great incomes, low expenses, low amount of debt, they'll lend to you. And this is a helpful approach when you're buying a lower yielding property, which actually has got good scope for capital appreciation. Or you're buying a property that needs a lot of work, perhaps is not even going to be rented that soon, but then you can develop, improve, and then sell off just on the basis of the fact that you've got high affordability, you've got high incomes. So these kind of lenders are not many, so there are only few lenders, but sometimes their rates can be quite competitive. It's not the case at the moment, but these things change with time. So it's a good idea to actually examine, what kind of lender you want to go for before you decide to go for any buy-to-let mortgage. Final point on taxes. So again, you can think of taxes just as Brahma talked about property costs. You can think about taxes also in different ways. There is a transaction-related tax element, and they're twofold. One is stamp duty, and the second is capital gains tax when you actually sell a particular property. There are ongoing taxes, which is your income tax, and then finally there is also a inheritance tax element, which is finally when you die and your estate goes on to the next generation, there is an inheritance tax incident. So you can think of taxes in different ways. So dependent upon whether you invest in a property as your own asset, meaning your individual names, or through a limited company, there are very different implications of that particularly on taxes. So let's start with stamp duty. The stamp duty, I think Brahma had mentioned previously that when you buy a property, you'll have a basic stamp duty and it will also have a 3% surcharge. Same applies for limited companies as well. So to that extent, there's not much of a differentiation between ordinary, holding and then limited company. With income tax, what is happening now is that most of the income tax benefits have gone away, and as a result, if you are a high rate taxpayer, you will have to pay taxes. Or if both of you, in a married couple are high rate taxpayers, you will end up paying 40% tax on your rental income. There are some expenses that you can claim related to property maintenance, but the biggest dissing factor is that you can't claim any interest cost reduction anymore. All you can do is whatever interest cost you get, 20% of the interest cost can be claimed as a tax credit. So as an example, if you're earning £15,000 in rent, you're spending £5,000 in interest cost, out of the total, if you're a 40% taxpayer, you'll pay 40% times 15,000, which is 6,000, and then you will get £1,000 of tax credit because you've got £5,000 of interest cost. So that's all that you will get, and it becomes quite punitive to hold property in individual names at times. There are certain ways, there are certain strategies of offsetting that, which we will cover in another time when we talk about limited company mortgages, or there are other ways to do it even when you're in your own hands. With capital gains tax, the length of time is very critical of how long you've held the asset, in particular where you've held that asset for some part of the time as your primary residence. So this is very true in case of let to buy cases, where many times let to buy cases are you've held a property for 5 years and then you start renting it out, and you've, let's say, rented it out for 5 years. Then the total capital gain is divided into two parts, and only on one part you have to pay capital gains tax. On the other, you get primary residence relief. You can offset certain expenses. So as an example, if you're buying through a limited company, transaction costs, stamp duty, all of these things can actually be offset from your expenses, but you can't do that when you're holding property in your individual names. So there are multiple things to think about when it comes to actually the overall tax incidence and your choice of whether you hold property in individual names or you hold property in through a limited company. From an inheritance tax perspective, again, the same things apply. How soon you pass on ownership to the next generation and how much sooner it is compared to when you're going to die will determine whether there will be an inheritance tax implication or not. And again, I think that the last topic did cover this to some extent. The last presentation that was done by this forum itself, I think, covered some of it to some extent, I believe. So the other thing that is also helpful to think about is how to create trusts, how to create limited company structures in order to avoid inheritance tax, which is a topic in itself. But there are opportunities available to plan your taxes better when you actually think about these things as well. Finally, the structuring of the buy-to-let, when you think about, doing it in personal name versus limited company SPV also has, interest cost implications, which is also useful to think about. So these are some of the things that you need to, pay attention to when determining what kind of mortgaging strategy and what kind of property ownership strategy you will have, which will be worthwhile keeping in mind. Let me hand it back now to Brahma to just cover risks and then do one more audience poll. Back to you, Brahma.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, I think, yeah.
Amol and
Please,
Brahma,
Brahma.
really thanks. Just a quick note. Would we be able to wrap in another 5 minutes, and then we can do question and answers if that's okay?
Sure. I'll try to
Thank
get
you.
that smooth in that. Okay, wonderful. So now, team, this slide probably will bring together multiple aspects that we've looked through as part of the presentation. So we've looked at why we should do BTL. We talked about strategies. We talked about right property. We talked about right, mortgage. But now there are certain aspects that we made along the way, certain points that we made along the way, which I've tried to consolidate in this particular slide. So let's look at all the risks. Particularly, buy-to-let investing is something that we recommend people ease into it. We should start with a simple buy-to-let first, understand the pains of being a landlord, understand the ins and outs before we go and look at something a bit more complex or something a bit exotic, like an HMO or a holiday let or a multi-unit block, right? So some of the things that we've talked about, periods of rental voids where you can't find a tenant, cost implications. We've talked about that in the past. That's a risk that we absolutely need to factor in. So the type of the property, for example, whether it's a flat or whether it's a leasehold property or whether it's an ex-council house property or is in a high rise, all come with certain amounts of risks where you might not find it easy to rent the property, or you might not find it that easy to sell the property when you actually go ahead and sell the property. So risks that we need to be kind of aware of. So maintenance costs, mortgage costs, I think we've covered that in adequate depth. The key message here is understand what you're getting into. Make a note of all the individual line items where you could have costs, and put the right values in so that when you build a business plan for yourself, you get the plan right. Troublesome tenants, we don't expect you to have these, but actually our reality of life is at some point of time, you might run into one of them. And then what would you do if you run into them, and whether you actually set aside costs and the processes, something to keep in the back of our mind. Property price, keep in mind that most buy-to-lets are taken on an interest-only basis. The way you are planning to pay the mortgage off is you sell the property, give the bank what the bank has lent to you, and then pocket any capital appreciation. So understanding and having a line of sight to whether you will be caught in a downturn where for a short period of time the property prices are down, I think should something be factored into your thought process. And also, is this risk real? Maybe a bit more real for flats, maybe a bit not more real for other types of buildings. Again, having a line of sight into what if here from a property price perspective, I think is important. Regulation risk, we've touched upon it. Either we need to be on top of it, or we need to hire a rental agency so that they make sure that we are all on the right side of the law. And property management is more of a lifestyle question also. Do I really want to manage a lot of properties? Am I cut out for it? Do I have the time to attend to tenant needs? Do I just want to manage one or two properties? Or am I really cut out to be a landlord? All of this, again, is tied back how we think through our buy-to-let strategy. Yeah. At this point of time, I think we've given you a very broad, high-level overview of BTLs. And if you have any particular questions or things that you want to ask, feel free to give us a buzz. I'm more than happy to look at any of the properties that you have and give you advice on that basis. But here, could we take a quick poll on what topics we'd like to cover when we meet next again?
So guys, if you can just tell us what are the topics that you'd like to cover next time? Okay.
Wonderful.
Great. So I think clearly, the first, the most, I think, popular choice is limited company buy-to-lets, and then also perhaps let to buy and portfolio landlords. We'll definitely cover those topics next time when we speak. All right. With that, we'd probably like to hand it back to Sulabh Bhai and Shubham Bhai to perhaps take it to the next to conclude.
Hey, thank you so much, Amol and Brahma. Yeah, it was really stimulating insights, facts, and strategies about buy to let, and we've got so many questions coming in through our chat panel. So we will move to question and answers round in a bit, and I'm just thinking. We will extend the session by another by let's up to another 20 minutes, so we should be finished with question and answers by 12:15. So audience, we are really aware you have many questions, so please feel free to put those through to our chat box, and we have extended question and answer rounds, so I'm sure Amol and Brahma would be able to pick them up. Thank you so much for your cooperation and questions. Now, I just wanted to take a moment to talk about next events that we have lined up. So I'm just giving a moment to, yeah. So we have planned another another event, which is a follow-up event on the current buy-to-let topic, and we're talking about some strategies for building a portfolio. Yeah, and the idea is to pick up some specific topics like limited company buy-to-lets, how does auctions work, commercial buy-to-lets, and some exotic strategies. We as JITO UK, we are also planning several other events in coming months across on various themes. Here's just a small list of upcoming events in near future. So please visit our events page for the latest information and registration. So you can see details of all events on our events page, jitouk.org/events. When you register for any event, you will get the credentials. If it's an online event, then Zoom credentials on how to log in. You will also get link to our website, to our JITO UK YouTube channel, and you can go to our channel and see recordings of our events. We have event coming up on 18th April on Buy to Let by Amol and Brahma. Then another event on 2nd May, Sunday, which is financial life skill for ladies. This is in Gujarati and English. Day-to-day management and whole life retirement and widowhood planning. The key audience target here is for ladies, but everybody is welcome to join in. On 9th May, Sunday, we have event on economy and investment series, and more on that later. So I would also like to take a moment to talk about JITO membership. So if you're not a JITO member yet, please sign up soon to be part of our global network. You'll be able to connect to like-minded people locally and globally for business ideas, trade opportunities, and professional development. Please visit our Become a Member page or reach out to us via below email and phone numbers. Um, so um, here, so you can reach out to Nitin. He is very helpful, but you can also reach out to anybody in JITO, any other JITO member or JITO UK board if you know anyone. And
So we seem to have, yeah, we had lost your voice for a bit.
Okay, I was just going to say that we can start with question and answers now, and we will do this for another 15 minutes, and then we will wrap up this session. So please let me bring up questions. So Amol and Brahma, it's over up to you. You guys, how you want to pick this up? I will start with the questions here.
Sure.
Yeah. So in terms of buy-to-let properties, what are like typical rates of returns if you have kind of a guidance or from your experience that you can suggest? And for example, and also like in terms of inheritance, can properties be passed on to kids via trust or some other ways?
Two different questions completely. So
Yeah.
first question, I think, is very hard to give a precise number on what kind of return one can get. As we mentioned in this whole presentation, it is a function of what is the property, how much it rents for, how you hold it, what kind of expenses you incur. So many different factors. Very difficult to put a number. I think generally speaking, people who the successful investors that we've seen, are able to get, double-digit returns fairly regularly and on a very predicted period of time. I think this is, like any other investing, it's the same thing. You must get a consistent rate of return over a long period of time. And that always beats getting 30, 40, 50%, 100% return once, and then again, losing money, in a different year. So I think what is more important is to perform consistently over a long period of time. That is what actually gives good returns. So long as you get 10% plus every single year, for over a long period of time, you will do quite well in terms of building your wealth. I think that's the best way to think about it. And of course, yields can vary widely based on what kind of properties one buys. The second question was on inheritance tax, I believe. So I think, yeah, it's possible to put properties in trusts. It's possible to put properties in limited companies. Each of them come with their own special nuances. So for example, you can't put properties in trusts whilst you still have a mortgage, or there are some ways to do it, but very, very limited ways to do it. Again, it's a large, vast, tricky, complicated field. By and large, unlevered properties can be put in trust. With levered properties or with mortgage properties, it becomes harder. That's the simple answer, although it's not very precise.
Right. Thanks, Amol. And by the way, just for everyone's benefit, we are planning a session on inheritance tax soon under JITO UK. So watch out for that, and probably this question could be raised again. Now, in terms of, we have got a lot of questions from audience in terms of owning a property in personal name versus buy to let. And I think, does it make sense to park this question for the next event on 18th April, where you would cover this in detail?
Yes, probably, because I think the limited company option is, I think, an option that is becoming more and more popular, and we'll discuss this in much fuller detail, on the 18th. So yes, please hold on to your questions for the 18th, and we'll probably dwell on it much in more detail then.
Okay. Now we've got a question on students buy to let. So are university towns typically considered good places for making buy to let investments, especially if somebody's targeting like university students?
Yeah, I think it's a very popular and a very age-old choice of targeting, high yield properties. This happens all the time, and we've seen many examples of properties that actually get uh, a lot of yield if there is a big student floating population. It is one of the most common features. Keep one thing in mind that ASTs versus student lets are quite different, and I think that just make sure that you disclose this to the lender. And there are different kinds of mortgages available for student lets, which are not the same as ASTs. So just keep that in mind, because we've seen examples where people have gotten into trouble as well because they've been operating student lets whilst having ASTs. So these things can hurt if not done correctly. But it's very popular choice, yes.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Lending a studio of flats versus trying to lend 5 bedrooms in a big house to each to 5 different students are two completely different things, and that the lender needs to know, and we need to plan for that.
Right. Another one, and this is again just a question from a tax perspective. So because the taxation rates are so high, if somebody is working on an open canvas, should they go for a property which provides better capital returns or better rental returns?
Brahma, you want to take that, or should I take it?
Sure, I'd be more than happy to give my thoughts here, and Amol, please feel free to chip in. I think it depends on your own personal strategy, and tax is something that there are always very legitimate ways of tax planning. Let's say, for example, I'm a high rate taxpayer. I've got a buy to let, and on all the rental income, I'm paying a 45% interest rate. What I could do is I could take a private pension and probably plow in all my rental income into a private pension. Then that becomes tax free. So from a tax planning perspective, even though I'm a high rate taxpayer, that's an efficient tax strategy. So I think it depends on what your personal goals are, and I think that determines how you tax plan. So Mol, if you want to add something to
this is one or two other points. I think it's a good point that you bring up on the pension. But I think there's another aspect, which is that the amount of leverage is also critical here. If you've got a lot of spare cash and you're able to limit the amount of leverage, yeah, you can go through look for properties which have got a higher potential for capital appreciation. Be aware that you are playing a different game versus if you're playing a rental yield game. The two are totally different business models, if you will. It's helpful to mix it up at times as well. We should know what you're doing at each point. That's all. It can be done. There's no right or wrong with these things.
And it also depends on how much dependent you are on the rental income that is coming in to meet your daily needs. If you're using the rental income to supplement your active income, and that's required for your daily needs, and obviously you would chase a property that gives you a rental yield. But if that's not a constraint, then the sky's limit. Then the sky's the limit in terms of what strategies you can plan.
And then moving on, can we let's say if in terms of interest rates, different banks offer different tenure. It could be a fixed 2 years fixed rate deal, 3 years, 5 years. Is there a kind of a recommendation on what to go for, and also maybe do you have a view on interest rate trend going forward?
We think that interest rates are unlikely to drop any further, given where we are in the economic cycle. So if I take that second question first, there will be small changes that happen. I think it will be more driven by risk appetite changes for lenders. It will not be driven by interest rates in the economy as much. Insofar as the choice between 2 years and 5 years, again, I don't think that there is a simple, formulaic answer that one can give here. Each of these things will vary based on your situation. And we've seen that several times 5-year rates work out better for clients because when they buy smaller properties, the fees are so high that it makes sense to rent out, sorry, to take a mortgage for 5 years as opposed to 2 years. On the other hand, if you're buying, 500,000 pound properties, in and around Greater London, sure, you can, keep remortgaging every 2 years because the interest rate becomes more important than the fee itself. So I don't think there's a formulaic answer to give here. I think the bottom line is that look at the mathematics of leverage before you decide what is more important. Just don't go by just because something is at giving you X thousand pounds in profit versus something else is giving you X thousand minus 1,000. Don't go for the X thousand. Think about what is your capital at stake here. Think about the return on equity. That is what should drive your decision, in my opinion.
And 2, 3, 5 years also is a bit of a flexibility decision also. If you want to do something with the property in 2 years' time, if you want to draw some equity out, if you want to sell the property, then don't lock yourself into a 5-year because doing so will invite punitive charges. Sometimes a 2, 3 versus 5 decision, like as Amol had said, is a leverage question also. With the 2-year, you might not be able to borrow as much because they stress you at a higher rate with the 2-year. So if you want to borrow a lot, you have to go for a 5-year. 3-year for buy-to-lets is somewhere in between and very few products to begin with. I think 3-year is a bit more popular with residential than with buy-to-lets, and buy-to-lets is largely a 2 or a 5 decision.
Thank you. I think
Struggling to hear.
Sorry, that didn't come through well. The voice question was.
I was going to say, is it any better now?
Yeah, much
better.
I was going to ask, maybe convincing cost could also be a factor here between 2 versus 5 if somebody wants to switch from one bank to another. Yeah.
Absolutely.
But
So
they are
all
banks,
the transaction
offering,
costs. Correct. All the transaction costs play a role.
And is it possible to parents to act as guarantor to get the first property for kids but rent it out?
Yes, it is possible. There are some lenders who do it, but for buy-to-lets, the minimum age for the child has to be 21 years, whereas for residential, it can be 18 years. So slight difference, but it can be done, and it is done. And we've got examples, that of clients who've done it.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned criteria in mind whether they can lend money against a buy-to-let property. Does the tax bracket of the borrower makes any difference? So if somebody's on a lower tax bracket versus higher tax bracket?
Go on, Bruno.
Yes, it actually surely does. Because for buy-to-lets, there is a concept of a stress rate and there is a concept of an interest cover ratio. What basically the government wants you to do is it wants you to be able to meet the obligations of your mortgage under stress conditions. And stress conditions come in two forms. One is they assume that the interest rate in the market is going to shoot up, and how high. If you're taking a 2-year, they assume that it goes up to 5.5%. And if you're taking a 5-year fixed, because you are less immune to volatility, they stress you at 4.5%. And even under this stress, they want your rental income to have a certain percentage of additional cover than what is required for your mortgage. And that is what is called interest cover. So usually 25% more or 45% more, depending on your tax bracket. So if you're a low rate taxpayer, as Amol mentioned when he covered his slides, you could borrow a bit more than if you're a high rate taxpayer. This is one angle where your tax bracket comes in. And then secondly, another place where tax bracket actually plays a big role is in tax planning. So we've seen a lot of couples where one of the spouses is a high rate taxpayer and the other one is a low rate taxpayer, in which case there was a form that Amol had mentioned in his slide, if you remember, called Form 17, that can be used to actually preferentially transfer more rent onto the name of that spouse who is a low rate taxpayer, and therefore gain a bit of a tax advantage. So yes, your tax bracket, spouse's tax bracket, plays an important role in terms of how much you can borrow and how you can manage your taxes for a more effective P&L.
Okay, thank you. And just a clarification on that, can this Form 17 be submitted at discretion of the borrower? So this year they can put up Form 17, and then another 4 years later they can change the ratios?
Yes,
I think yes, I think so. Yes.
Okay. And again, relating to some taxation aspect, is the stamp duty, is that an expense or capital cost?
For individual buy-to-let, stamp duty is a capital cost. You can't get anything out of stamp duty. Whereas for limited company, because the property that is bought itself is considered as a stock in trade. It is the same, think of it as the same way as if you're buying a car for recreational purposes versus you're buying a car to operate a tourist taxi company. If you're buying a car to operate a tourist taxi company, it will be considered a stock in trade with which you earn money. So it's the same way, for buy-to-let properties. Through a limited company, everything is deductible. Through personal, nothing is deductible by and large.
Then I think this one is from a limited. So can if the can a come interest towards original deposit to purchase the property? And I think what the question here is, can a borrower borrow from the deposit money from another company and then put it as a deposit to the bank?
That is definitely possible for a limited company. I mean, intercompany deposits or intercompany loans are acceptable. Particularly, this is quite popular for folks who are working in the IT sector, where wife and husband own an IT firm through which they operate, whether the so-called outside IR35 contracts. And if they've got money trapped in there, then that company can give a loan to the SPV or the property company. And this can be usually structured as 0% interest payable after 25 years type of a loan. And you can move money from your IT company into your property company without any tax implications immediately.
Okay. Just a clarification regarding Form 17, and because this is such an important topic from a taxation perspective, not the taxes rate are high. Does the other person have to be in a relationship with the main borrower or part of the mortgage deed? So, for example, name is not on the title or on the mortgage deed, can still you submit Section 17 form?
You can't use Form 17 if the other person is not on the title. You have to be owning the property in order to earn rent.
Right.
That is the first requirement.
Okay, thank you. And then I think just in the interest of time, I will just go to the last question. And in case of a personal buy-to-let, can a user offset stamp duty cost when look capital gains? And I think because is that the answer is yes to it, I suppose, but please. So stamp duty cost, will it be reduced from the capital gains, because you said it cannot be an expense, right?
It cannot be an expense. Yes, absolutely.
So then it will come off the capital gains.
Yes, as a transaction cost, the cost of acquiring property, you can do it.
Right. Okay. Just one last thing, if you have any views on it, buying a property versus investing in a real estate investment trust, or maybe stock market, if you have just broad views on it.
I think the main difference firstly, in any investment, generally speaking, we try to, spread around our assets to not be over invested in any one sector. These are different asset classes. REITs are very different. Real estate investment trusts are very different to residential mortgages. I think the main reason why people invest in residential property is because you can see the asset in front of your own eyes. It's earning you a rate of return. You've got the relative security of it. Whereas, there are the risks with REITs and other assets, like mutual funds, are quite different to the risks with property. I think that what I would suggest is that each of them have their own merits and demerits. I think taking a balanced portfolio approach is much better than just saying that I prefer this over that. I think REITs have got some advantages. They don't have other advantages that properties have. But I think the main advantage here is that of leverage. So, for us, property investment makes sense because it offers direct leverage, and the kind of leverage it offers, no other asset class offers that kind of leverage.
Thank you so much, Amol and Brahma. There are so many questions coming through. Unfortunately, due to time limitations, we cannot take all of them. But I suppose when we do the next event, we would be able to cover a few additional questions there.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, again, thank you very much to all the JITO members for organizing, the audience for coming on the call and patiently listening to our views. And if you have other questions, please post them to us. You can look us up on LinkedIn and please ask us questions. We're happy to answer whatever you might have.
Thank you so much. I would like to invite our board member Shubham Jain to give a vote of thanks. Yeah. Shubham, over to you, please.
Thanks a lot. And thanks a lot, Amolji and Brahmaji. As someone new to Buy-to-Let like me, the topic has been of an extreme value. And I'm sure that a lot of our listeners would also feel the same. And talking about the listeners, I would like to thank all our listeners as well today. Now you have an even compelling portfolio of skills through the JITO events. In our past events, we understood how to plan the taxes better, how to understand the markets, and multiple more. And now we have learned how to invest smartly through Buy-to-Let. I hope you would have found it as enriching as all of us here. And I'm sure that our super expert panelists would also be happy to take the mortgage related questions at a later stage. Also, at this point, I would like to give a special thanks to our sponsors for the events that make it possible for us to generate such compelling events, Comline and Mortgage Guard themselves. So makes me come back to you, our expert panel today. Once again, on behalf of entire JITO organization, would like to thank you for taking time in delivering a topic of such immense utility to all the members of our community, and looking forward to the follow-up session in 2 weeks' time. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you. It's our pleasure. Thank you very much.